Lift up and hit the Y. There you got?
Yes.
Very good. And then finally the C. Yeah, again, good job. Thank you. So, it works really well. A lot of people watch this though and they say things like, well, my grandfather gave me a little orphan anti-decoder ring and that can encrypt and decrypt, so why is this so special? The reason it's special is it's because it's doing it at a rate of 3 times 10 to the 114th power. Now, that's the challenge that this machine presented. Now we're going to talk about how the Allies
dealing with the 3 wheels, how did they solve the wheels inside this machine? This machine was used.
This was used, yes. Well, the reason that these were created was because Alan Turing had built a similar earlier type of device at Bletchley Park. So the 3-rotor bombs were used at Bletchley Park. This is a 4-rotor bomb which was built to handle the 4-rotor traffic. It is interesting to note, though, that Alan Turing, who was one of the most brilliant men of our times, came over to Dayton to consult with Joe Desch. And he was very kind and very nice, but he didn't want to really be rude. So he stayed for 3 weeks and gave him a couple of pointers. But then he returned back to the United Kingdom and told his chain of command privately that the Americans were way off and they didn't have a clue, and that sooner or later it was going to be the British that solved this 4-rotor problem. Turing was wrong. It's hard to believe he could be wrong about anything in the realm of science and technology, but he was dead wrong. This machine was faster than the one the British built, and because of its efficacy, by the end of the war, the British were sending us their extra 3-rotor traffic. All you had to do was flip a switch and you could run 3-rotor traffic on it. So it actually was an improvement over the British model.
Did he understand that there is a 4th wheel, or they suspected that they even changed the Enigma?
No.
Totally?
What happened was there were references to the change the Navy was going to make in the 3-rotor traffic. And next week we're going to 4 rotors, and here's how you communicate with us.
So they knew the 4th wheel is going to get.
Yes, and well, they knew it 2 ways. First off, their 50th anniversary this year. The Beach Boys, Good Vibrations. The year the theremin being played. Leon Theremin was a genius with wave technology. He was one of their top scientists. He also had been sent to Siberia when he was about 19, and he didn't want to go back there. So when the Soviets asked him to help, he said, sure, just tell me what you need. And he comes up with a brilliant plan. Here's how it worked. Every 4th of July, every year, the Soviets would send a delegation over to Spaso House. They would greet the ambassador, wish America a happy birthday, and normally they would present him with a gift. This is a particularly important year because, again, of the fact that both countries have been working together during World War II. A group of Soviet school children arrive at Spaso House on the 4th of July 1946. They are ushered into the ambassador's study. He greets them, and they hand him a wood carving of the Great Seal of the United States. Ambassador Harriman is touched by the gesture, tells the boys and girls, you guys are wonderful, I'm going to put this on the wall of my study, which he did. And it remained on the study wall from 1946 until 1952, but as we say in America during the holidays, it was not only a gift, it was a gift that kept on giving, because as you've already figured out, it was also a microphone. Now, let's go back to those 3 technicians. What happened to them? Did they not do a good job? No. They're still working hard every day. But they're looking for bugs. They're looking for electronic signals. This does not give off any kind of a signal at all. The way it works is they put a radio wave over the house. As long as that wave is on the house, the mic will go live and you can hear what's being said. The bad part is when you turn the wave off, it's just some wood with a little sliver of metal in it hanging on the wall. They were able to get critical information from the ambassador for a very, 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 very long time. And this would have kept on for a long while, probably long past 1952, but on a warm summer evening, a British radio operator was trying to pick up conversations in the greater Moscow area. Now, by that time, the great Cold War icon and intellectual George Kennan had replaced Averell Harriman, and he loved to speak Russian with a perfect Muscovite accent. So every day he would talk into a dictaphone and play it back. And he was in his study doing this when the British radio operator picked up his voice. And he told the Americans, I don't know if you know it or not, but your ambassador is broadcasting. They were aghast. They took the ambassador's desk, smashed it into a million pieces, and found nothing. Well, then they took a team of experts. These were even more skilled than the previous team, had them go through the house with a fine-tooth comb, and finally, on a hunch more than anything else, one of the engineers decided to test the Great Seal and found that it was indeed a passive listening device. They took the Great Seal down, they put it into storage, and we would not have heard about the Great Seal probably until after the Cold War was over, maybe never, because it was very classified and also the whole incident was pretty embarrassing. However, the Great Seal does reappear, strangely, in May of 1960 in conjunction with the shoot-down of Captain Francis Gary Powers of the United States Air Force. Now, Powers was one of a group of hand-picked pilots who had been chosen by the CIA to fly U-2 aircraft over the Soviet Union. This program was incredibly important. The only way that Eisenhower could get the information about critical issues such as how many nuclear weapons do the Soviets have was through this U-2 program, and it proved to be extremely helpful. Now, for the pilots, this was not easy. U-2s are not easy planes to fly, but the good news was they fly so high that there were no anti-aircraft devices that could get up high enough to that altitude to shoot them down. Well, again, if your plane stays in the air and the engine works fine, you should be able to get from point A to point B without much of a problem. Now, the Russians have a different view. These planes are violating their airspace, they're violating international law, and it's frustrating to people like Nikita Khrushchev because they do have to watch them on their radar screens, and Khrushchev threatened his air marshals and told them, you better find a way to shoot these planes down. Now, periodically, one of the U-2s would get low enough to where the Soviets would have a pretty good shot at it. And on May 1st, Captain Francis Gary Powers' plane was just low enough. The Soviets tried a different approach. Instead of sending just one missile up, they sent a collection of them and exploded them simultaneously. The shock wave knocked Powers' plane out of the sky. Miraculously, he's able to parachute out, or to engage his parachute, and he floats safely to the ground, where he arrives without a scratch. Now, of course, the Russians captured him. He was taken into custody, and about 2 months earlier, ironically, Powers had been at a briefing with a bunch of CIA officials and had asked them, what's the plan if we get shot down? What are we supposed to say? What's our cover story? And the answer from the official was, well, if they do capture you, tell them everything because they're going to get it out of you anyway. So now he pretty much spills his guts, tells them exactly what he's been doing, and the Russians have a real advantage because they know that America is going to assume that Powers is dead. And knowing that, they go to the United Nations and they ask the UN to require that the United States provide some kind of an explanation as to what these planes are doing. And because the inquiry was coming from the UN, the United States government had no choice but to provide an answer. It took them 2 days to formulate it, and then they finally told the Russians and the world the following. Dear Soviet Union, please don't worry about these planes. You may have concerns, but all they are doing is taking weather measurements. They are part of the National Aeronautic and Space Administration's efforts to make sure that the atmosphere is in perfect condition for future space flights. This is a scientific situation. We're not spying, and we're sorry that you're upset, and we're also sorry that one of our planes has crashed. And you know mechanical things often malfunction. By the way, Soviet Union, today at NASA headquarters at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a prominent NASA spokesman will provide an hour-long briefing on this important program, so send your reporters so that you can get the whole story. And that press conference was given, and when it was done, President Eisenhower said, I'm glad that's over with. They asked us about this program, we told them, I don't care whether they believe it or not, and now the crisis will fade away. It would have, except 2 days later, Khrushchev told the world, foolish Americans, they've told us this lie because their pilot is in custody and alive, and he has told us what this is really about, basically spy planes. When this was revealed to the world, the United States and the Eisenhower administration's credibility was gravely damaged. Now, if you watch politics in the United States, and it's probably true in other countries as well, if you have your credibility damaged by your opponent, you have to immediately respond and try to damage theirs. And that's exactly what happened in this case, because Eisenhower decided to take the Great Seal of the U.S. and bring it onto the floor of the UN to make the point that America was not the only country involved in dirty, underhanded, surreptitious espionage. It wasn't much of a return for a U-2, but it was all that he had to work with. This is a good way to understand that the Cold War was not only fought militarily, and that nuclear weapons kind of kept the lid on things, but there were efforts by either side to try to embarrass the other through diplomatic and public relations means, and this is probably one of the best examples of that. You could embarrass your opponent, it was almost as good as beating them on the battlefield. One last point. Gary Powers is eventually exchanged for a Soviet spy, comes back to the United States, works for the CIA for a year, and then eventually retires, buys a little house out in Los Angeles, decides to take up a hobby, flying helicopters. He gets his license and decides to take a job to supplement his income as the afternoon traffic reporter for a local LA radio station. Every afternoon, the man who was shot down flies up and down the freeways, gives up-to-the-minute traffic reports, and the radio station loved him because he had a great work ethic. On one occasion, there was a huge wreck. He's supposed to go off the air at 6 p.m. He stays in the air until 7:30, helping commuters to get home. The next day, however, he goes up and doesn't think about the fact that he was up in the air for an hour and a half longer, and the helicopter ran out of fuel and crashed. So the man who had once parachuted from the highest heights of any human being ever died because he forgot to fill up his gas tank. Questions? You need? So why did they win the cryptologic war? Well, machines like Enigma failed and were able to be compromised, and machines like Sagaba, for the most part, were able to keep our communications secret. Questions? All right, let's finish up with the supercomputer. I can talk about that for sure. Okay, we'll take this question.
This is two here and two this is Be interested what you have to say.
For sure. All right. Now, we already talked a little bit about the Cold War, and certainly the Gary Powers incident was not a good time for the relations between the two powers. America had been caught in a lie. But the worst was yet to come in terms of relations between the two countries, because eventually you would have the Bay of Pigs, and then the incident where the world probably came as close.
J-A-R, and then now E, which is H, and D, which is I.
That's pretty amazing. What's more amazing is people figured it out.
Oh, cracked it?
Yeah.
That's what I was reading over here.
What kind of eggheads you gotta be? Right, but I mean, they were just looking at the message. And they figured out. Amazing.
What do you think about it?
Not only that, it's not your native language. State library.